We have already transformed the way the world operates. And now I believe we have a chance to do it all again. To be the great explorers of the next era.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jacky Wright. I am the Senior Partner and Chief Technology Officer for McKinsey. And I have 4 esteemed guests here who I'd first like them to introduce themselves, and we'll get into the discussion. So why don't we start with you, Avanti?
Okay, sure. So I want to start with saying moyen and greetings from Luxembourg. I'm Avanti. I'm actually 17 years old, and I'm the preteen technology specialist at an organization called Workshop for Me. So we're a non-profit organization working towards empowering the younger generations to become the leaders of their future through technology and programming-based skills. And I'm delighted to be with all of you today.
Very good. It's great to have a 17-year-old on stage with me. Thank you. Why don't we go to you, Nikolai?
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Jacky. So, hello, everyone. I'm Nikolai Frolov from Kaspersky. I'm working in Kaspersky ICSR team. That's the Department of Industrial Cyber Security, but we have different research in a different area, like toys, IoT devices. So that's all.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Anne Ruiz. I'm a director of Alto Tempo Foundation. My organization promotes healthy environments through education, and now I'm a doctoral student of Salamanca University. I'm creating a musical metaverse through the new technologies, intelligence, artificial intelligence, different things related to technology, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Anne. John.
Thank you, Jacky. Thank you, colleagues, and thanks everybody for joining today. My name is John Warnes. I'm working for the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and working on our Connectivity for Refugees portfolio, which is a big new agenda, transformative plan, working together with ITU and GSMA to advance the connectivity for 20 million forcibly displaced people in their host communities by 2030, and I work on this initiative in UNHCR's Innovation Service.
So great. This topic is really about vulnerable, marginalized communities and how we can empower them. But I'd like to first start with a definition. I mean, people interpret it many different ways. So maybe we'll start with you, John. What's your interpretation of how do we define vulnerable?
Thanks, Jacky. And it's a question of much debate because there are different perceptions, as you say, depending on what type of organization you're with, and also with communities and how they see themselves. And I think that one thing we've learned as UNHCR is that communities aren't inherently vulnerable. It's the positions around them, the systems, the structures they're the resources that they maybe have available that put them in positions of vulnerability. But often they are marginalized by society, by the systems that they're living within. So UNHCR, we take an approach where we look at age, gender diversity and take a really intersectional approach to make sure that as we advance the inclusion of refugees and asylum seekers around the world, that we're also cognizant of the different protection needs that they have in a digital society to make sure, regardless of those factors like age, disability and so on, that they're protected from risk.
So it's multifaceted. Avanti, what about you? How do you define vulnerable?
I mean, just as John mentioned, the definition keeps changing based on what sector you're in. But I think in general, when I think of vulnerable communities, I would say vulnerable in 5 fronts. So, those who lack, resources and access, those who, are maybe underprivileged due to the social surroundings, those who lack education, and those who lack needs. And those with physical disabilities. So, out of these 5, we can already classify 3 into the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 3, good health and well-being. Goal 4, quality education. And Goal 10, reduced inequalities. And the others fit into the other targets and indicators. And I think what's important, to note about all of these different vulnerabilities is they can all kind of be, classified into 2 main streams. One is those who, lack education, and the other is those who lack access. And I would even say that both of them are in a way linked, because if you have access to technology, you also have access to education. In fact, in the world today, 2.3 billion% of our global population actually uses technology to get educative information online. And we've seen that 47% of the world's poorest use mobile devices to connect. So I think that we're in the perfect place to discuss this topic right now.
Yeah, and you touched on access. So I'm going to pose this question to you, Nikolai and Anne. Access can mean increased opportunity, for sure. At the same time, increased access can also mean more exposure to the very harms that you've just talked about. So how do we increase access to digital technologies for vulnerable communities? And what role should governments, NGOs play in that?
Should I start?
Yes,
Thank
why
you,
don't you
Jackie. According to this question, I think that it might take something like multiplex approach.
Multiple.
Yeah, so something like that. So we need to work together. So government, non-profit organization, private organization, like cybersecurity organization. For example, we saw lots of cyber risks in this area, like general cyber risks, like cyberbullying, like, for example, frauders may put some kind of phishing links more and more. So that's very bad for vulnerable. Moreover, we found the different way. So, for example, like we had a research of smart toy.
Yeah.
So that's particularly for children, and we found a few security issues there. So the security issue connected with information disclosure,
Yes.
like parents' names, parents' emails, parents' phones, and children information disclosure. So children privacy is very sensitive.
So clearly, online safety.
Yeah,
And what you're talking about are risks associated.
Yeah. So, and moreover, the second security issue that it may be possible to make a call to any robot in this system by this vendor. So that's very bad, and I think we need to work together with the government, with the private organization, makes trainings, security trainings, like security developmental life circle, to protect it more and more.
So Anne, what do you think about?
Yes, it's about the similar point with him, because in the schools and different environments related to schools, the children has exposed to different possibilities to the technology, and it's very important work together about this consequence through the technology. In fact, it's possible to work together to try to avoid this risk.
Do you have an example of that?
Yes, for example, when the children have an access to the maybe to buy games inside to the platform, it is possible to get the information for the parents in the different dates, and maybe it's possible to prevent this type of space if you all the time use a parental control for this, for example.
Okay, John, are you seeing the same thing when you think about access, both the harm and the good, actually, from an access perspective?
Yeah, I think one thing to just pick up on the points, there's a whole variety of different types of risks, and actually we're still, particularly in the work that we do in the humanitarian sector, very much trying to understand the implications of all of these risks. And some of them are technological, linked to vulnerabilities in solutions, but it's also user behavior, user literacy, as Avanti was saying, and making sure that the combination of these things works in tandem to create a more safe and secure environment. When we actually spoke with many refugees about these types of issues, though, what's interesting is the compromises that they have to make because of the fact that these people are marginalized, often unable to maybe afford access or to be able to take advantage of these things. They're willing to maybe take risks that others aren't in order to get that access. And that's such a shame and a tragedy when there's so much that they can benefit from education through to getting online work and other things. And it isn't such the case that those risks should be there. So we need a concerted effort, as you were saying, amongst the different types of stakeholders working with communities, not only to address these risks, but also to listen to them and bring them into that conversation and really look at the ways that it's impacting their lives.
And what do you think about education? I mean, part of it is literacy, raising all boats and everyone really understanding the harms, even parents. But what do you think as a 17-year-old out there? What do you think about literacy and where does literacy play in this?
You know, I think it's a really interesting question because, as we mentioned, at one point, you know, having access can be such a benefit in literacy and in education, but on the other hand, it exposes so many people to all of these harms, you know, and we've seen cybersecurity threats again and again, and it kind of, I would say, circles back to the initial point of education, you know, and the education of also staying safe online. It's like if you give you know, someone a knife, yes, your knife also makes dinner, but yes, your knife also, you know, can be used to hurt yourself or to hurt someone else. But you still have to be educated on how to use that knife to use it for the good and not the bad. So I would say for this point of, you know, literacy and risks online, I just want to add to your point, which you mentioned, saying that we have to educate people on the risks, but not only about what the risk is, but how the risk will affect them. And I think specifically the younger generation, you know, feels very strongly about this because if you tell us, okay, don't think of a monkey, what are you guys all thinking of right now? A monkey, right? That's the first thing which comes to your mind. And that's just human nature. But if you say, what are the risks and how does it affect you about being safe online, then I think we'll really start to see a change in the way we look at things.
And Anne, do you have any examples of educational strategies that you've seen work, or even just examples of?
Yes, the different schools was working together for different strategies. For example, seminars and workshops related with this, and you have children in front of you and talking and discuss about the different risks related to the technology, and organize maybe not in academic way.
No, in
you was playing with the children with the different examples for try to understand the different risks related to the technology and the use for this type of technology. Because all these children are very maybe smaller children and they don't understand the risk about the technology really.
And what about you, Nikolai, in the cyber and risks? What are you? How are you?
Yes, thank you, Jacky. So in this question, we have something like we have experience and we have a knowledge in this area. So we share our knowledge with community. So, for example, we had some of our experts have experience when they went to school, went to university, and share the knowledge to students, to children. So I think that it's a good practice. Moreover, I think that we need to share information with, for example, some kind of vendors to make the products security too, because it also have a connection between the what we use and who use it. So because so it's
So yours is this ecosystem, right?
yeah.
Vendors, partners.
So something like security by design system. If it was, I think it will be better for all of us.
And what about refugee? How are we thinking about those who are truly marginalized, educating them where access may not even be possible, John?
Yeah, to try and maybe link some of the points from Nikolai and Avanti together, I think that not being paternalistic about it is really important, and letting users being able to sort of set that agenda and direction of how do they want to remain safe, and getting them to be part of that process. And this applies much with technological controls and solutions, that this doesn't need to be something that is so complicated that end users are having a hard time getting to grips with the type of solutions that are out there to protect them, whether it's software solutions, hardware solutions, or otherwise, but that actually we make it an easy process for people actually to go through that to remain safe online. This would mean that we're sort of really trying to look at our users, look at their levels of understanding, and make sure we're designing products with their interests and with their perspectives in mind. And I think that will end up with a more literate population, regardless of context. This isn't just about refugees even, or people in one particular part of the world, but really designing with the user is a core principle that goes across everything. And sometimes we maybe put that to one side when we're looking at some of these risk-based elements, and forgetting that, we don't have to be paternalistic about this. We can bring communities into that process.
And so, at the heart of this conversation is the idea of creating a safe and inclusive environment for everyone. What inclusion looks like can vary depending on who you are, where you are, your environment. But the data says that for more than 1 billion people in the world living with some form of disability, inclusion means accessible technologies that empower them to lead more independent, inclusive, and fulfilling lives. So I guess the question is, how can we build on that and ensure inclusion is embedded in all aspects of what we do? And, I think about your parents and the likes. What would you say, Avanti?
I mean, I think inclusion, as you mentioned, for more than 1 billion people is some form of, kind of combating some form of disability. And I think that one thing which is so important for all of us to understand, either in the industry or as a nonprofit, is understanding the needs of those who we are trying to cater to. So often, we see in the industry that we kind of come up with a problem ourselves, and we find a solution to a problem ourselves to kind of say that, we're inclusive and we found solutions to these problems. But in reality, we actually aren't asking the main market of who we're coming up the solution for. So I think the first thing which would be so important to do is asking the people in need what they need, so then we can cater to them.
And in the education, you talked about music for Meta. Why don't you talk about some things that you're doing there? Because that is about being inclusive, but with music at the heart of it.
It's so hard because we need to protect our children in every space. In digital space is very important too. And we have to create protocols of cybersecurity and compliance, because since the beginning, it's very, very, very important to try to support our technology with them. Exclusively for the metaverse in music, now we can create different activities related through music and technology and cybersecurity too, because all the time the children are exposed for this technology, and it's important to try to understand the risk about this. And obviously, it's not clear try to the cooperation for the children, but working together with my team about this.
So Nikolai, you're all about creating a safe environment. And inclusion is at the heart of that as well. So how are you thinking about it?
Yes, for me, I agree with colleagues. So that's very difficult task. And for example, in Kaspersky, we try to make this. So we design product for people with using the knowledge what they want and what they want to protect. So because of this, I think that we all need to do something like that. So we need to see what people need and do something like this.
And do you think safety is at the heart of that, and creating an inclusive environment is key?
I think something like that. Yeah. So we need to create inclusive environments and build the safer world together.
John.
So Avanti mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. There's one of the universal values, leave no one behind, a common principle that is really critical to this inclusion agenda. And actually last year, UNHCR launched its first ever digital transformation strategy. And actually 2 of these pillars of that strategy complement this point very well, because one is digital inclusion, the other is digital protection. And what we mean by protection is that safety and security in online environments, because these do go hand in hand. And to get very operational, while these are big complex issues, there are ways forward, ways we can address these things. We know that evidence points to a huge gap between the levels of connectedness and inclusion of refugees around the world, on average half as likely as their host communities to have access to connectivity. But there are strategies that can be taken to advance that, and we've talked a lot about the need for that multi-stakeholder dialogue and communities being part of that dialogue. That's critical and very much part of our Connectivity for Refugees agenda, which actually aims to prioritize these and put long-term sustainable plans in place to address literacy barriers, access barriers, affordability barriers. Economics is absolutely vital. Many of these marginalized groups are often as such because the economics of getting online put them, as I was saying earlier, in that difficult position where they have to compromise and make choices. But across that journey, that protection can be paramount, and that principle of accountability to people is something that we can bring into all of those threads around digital inclusion. And by working together, by establishing sort of concrete platforms for change that bring together those community groups, NGOs, civil society, as well as the private sector whose experience in the technology solutions and systems can create a safer environment, we'll end up with that sort of ecosystem that really accelerates not only adoption within these communities of digital technology, but also that capacity for safety and awareness within that environment too.
So I'm going to ask a question that we weren't on our agenda, but I'm curious. Do you believe that technology today with Gen AI, etc., is creating a bigger gap as it relates to vulnerable and marginalized communities, or do you think it's decreasing the gap? I'd be curious of your thoughts. Avanti, what do you think?
So, I think Gen AI is definitely a hot topic of 2023 and definitely 2024 as well. And we've seen with the advancement of generative AI, it's actually helping people who don't have access to a tutor or who don't have access to go to school regularly to actually bridge that gap with their peers, because Gen AI is helping people to learn, and it's giving them resources which they wouldn't have. Kind of following on up on the point of schools and the point we talked in, the first question which you mentioned, generative AI is just another tool which we can use to connect people together and bridge that digital divide. So I think in my opinion, Gen AI is actually a step forward in this issue.
All right, so you think step forward. What do you think? Do you agree with that, Nick?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So, for my opinion, I think that that's really a step forward for protection for protection too. So not only child protection, but that's in this area too again because, for example, we have lots of rules, so that we use to, for example, find some kind of attack in this area, and when we use machine learning to it makes it easier.
So you think we have tools to be able to help bridge this with security in mind as a key enabler? What about you?
Yes, I agree, but we need to work more. Right. Now in our project, I'm including successful interfaces, and it is possible to include other type of children, for example, blind children. But we need to continue to work more because it's a new technology now. It's very, very, very new. It's impossible to try to have now the different tools for this.
And John, do you think it's...
Am I going to be the only one that says to the... I mean, I think that AI is a very powerful tool. It can do many things. For instance, better mapping of connectivity data, intelligent managing of bandwidth. But is that going to get a device into someone's hand? Is it going to put money in their pocket to pay for data packages? Not necessarily. And I think that we need to be cognizant about those real-world, everyday challenges that people will still face. And when it comes to other dimensions, such as literacy and adoption, you may even see the gaps increasing, and the gap also in terms of risk increasing, with some people who are literate in such technologies being able to make use of them to their advantage, and those who are not freely as able to access them facing setbacks that others are not facing. So I think that while it is a very powerful tool and we can leverage it in so many of our efforts around an inclusion agenda and a protection agenda, that we need to make sure we don't sort of lose sight of some of those really fundamental dimensions that are going to get the next billion online.
And those fundamental dimensions differ by geography, experience, what you're exposed to. I think I tend to agree. It is powerful, but we must not lose sight of the fact that there are still people who don't even have access today. So we're going to kind of summarize this on next steps. For each of you, we've had an interesting discussion. What are some of the next steps we can take to continue working towards digital empowerment? And I'd like each of you to just touch on how can industry, education, governments, what's your view? And personally, how you feel about the progress we've made or we have not made in that. And I'm going to start with you, John, and work our way around.
Okay. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for progress in this space. And I think that we've seen over recent years in events like this and others that everybody's really championing this agenda, and it's great to be on stage talking about it today. Now is the time to move to action. And I think that that's where we do need to move from that rhetoric and put together plans that actually advance this. And the idea of the initiative that I mentioned earlier, Connectivity for Refugees, is actually sort of an open hand. If there is private companies out there or government regulators who are seeking to advance this agenda, come and talk to us, because we believe that with the sort of support and the need for digital transformation, whether that's private sector finance, development actors, or other contributors to this, they want to see and recognize the benefits. And actually, if we look at the sort of economics of it, it makes sense to be inclusive because of the sheer gains that can be gathered. We just need to get those models right, the business models right, and test them out, try new things, not be afraid to take risks in what we're doing. And I think that that's part of it, but in a responsible way, and that puts communities at the center. And that's that sort of trade-off that we really need to bring into our thinking. And we're going to be working in a number of countries, some of the countries hosting the biggest number of refugees in the world, to sort of work through this agenda and invite everybody to reach out to us to be part of that. And similarly, on the digital protection side of things, UNHCR as a protection agency, part of our legal mandate internationally is advancing steps to combat misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, fraud and scams, a full swathe of that agenda to make sure as we're advancing that inclusion, we can take steps there. But it really requires in that space, in this online environment, major players in industry, particular social media companies and others, to really step up and be part of that dialogue and not be fighting against that sort of momentum that's there of bringing people together.
So again, community at the center, but a holistic approach to engaging.
Yep.
What about you, Anne, with education and...
Education is trending now.
Yeah.
And continues working and continues have many experiments with the different communities, because it's not the same time if you work with vulnerable communities and rich communities. It's a great and a big difference, because in public schools, the tools for try to work, it's so many different if you work in a vulnerable population in vulnerable communities. And we need to try to come back again and working together for try to compensate the equilibrium for these communities.
So schools, an integral part of this, part of the education.
Yes, for example, I'm from Colombia, and in Colombia there is a lot of poor people and vulnerable people too. And it's not possible to get the access for the technology. It's impossible, almost impossible to try to get the technology. And if you study in public schools here in Europe, the conditions are very different, really. So we need to continue working in that, because it's very so different.
Very good. Again, global nature, very different, access in certain places. Totally agree. Nicola, what about you?
So as for me, I think that colleagues say all my thing. So I think I agree with John at all of his speech. So I think we need to work together to define some kind of results.
With that security and safety lens,
Yeah.
weave that through everything.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
And why don't we end with you? What do you think, Avanti?
I mean, I would like to just come back onto the point of the panel is, really about vulnerability. And I mean, in the world today, we see a lot of divisions. We have a lot of wars going on right now. And it kind of comes back to the same topic of, vulnerability, right? And we've seen that with technology it can be great to connect people, but it's also a source of misinformation. And misinformation causes division, and it causes fights and harm. So I think the first thing which we can do all together as a community is to try and combat misinformation. And I'll take this, as a call for all organizations to come together, to kind of clarify the real and separate truth from opinions. I think this is very important to do. And the second initiative, which I'd like to mention, kind of springboarding off of John when he was talking about generative AI, it's true. A lot of people do not have access to technology or to the internet. And here I'd like to touch upon an initiative by the Luxembourgish government to actually encourage people, the most vulnerable to get access to this. We have an initiative called My Connectivity. And what that does is that subsidizes those who aren't unable to, maybe pay or afford Wi-Fi and also devices to kind of get that access for them. So I think those 2 points are what I'd like to end on. And if together we work all together, I think we can definitely see a much brighter future. So let's make it happen.
All right. I'd like you to just round of applause for the panelists. Thank you so much.